What if the most influential autobiography in Western history was written by a man who stole pears just to watch them rot, lived with a mistress for 15 years, and begged God to make him holy? But not yet. That is St. Augustine, and his Confessions is not the pious devotional most people assume it is. It is one of the most psychologically raw, intellectually dangerous, and disturbingly modern books ever written. And almost everything people think they know about it is wrong. Today I'm going to take you through the themes in this book that scholars study but popular culture ignores. By the end, you may never think about free will, memory, or even time itself in quite the same way. Let us begin with what might be the strangest passage in the entire book: the theft of the pears. As a teenager, Augustine and his friends stole pears from a neighbor's orchard. They did not eat them. They threw them to the pigs. And Augustine spends an extraordinary amount of time, pages and pages, analyzing why he did this. Here's the spicy take that most readers miss entirely. Augustine is not being dramatic about a minor sin. He is constructing, for the first time in Western thought, the concept of evil for its own sake. Every philosopher before him, Plato, Aristotle, the Stoics, believed that people only do wrong because they are confused about what is good. Nobody chooses evil knowingly. Augustine looks at those pears rotting on the ground and says, "I did. I chose it precisely because it was wrong. The wrongness was the attraction." This is a philosophical earthquake. Augustine is saying that the human will is capable of something no previous thinker believed possible, desiring destruction purely for the pleasure of destruction. If you have ever wondered where the modern concept of pure malice comes from, the kind you see in characters like the Joker or Anton Chigurh, it begins here, in a teenage boy throwing stolen fruit to pigs. Now we come to what may be the most honest sentence ever written in a religious text. In Book 8, Augustine prays, "Grant me chastity and continence, but not yet." Most people treat this as a charming anecdote. It is not charming, it is terrifying. Augustine is confessing that he can simultaneously want God and want to keep sinning, and that both desires are completely genuine. He is not being hypocritical. He is being split in two. Here is what nobody discusses. Augustine uses this moment to demolish the entire Stoic and Platonic theory of the will. Those traditions said, the will is unified. If you truly know the good, you will do it. Augustine says this is nonsense. He has experienced it himself. He knows the good, he desires the good. And at the very same moment, with equal force, he desires the opposite. The will is not one thing, it is a civil war. This insight predates Freud by 1500 years. Augustine discovered the divided self, the idea that we are not unified agents, but battlegrounds of competing desires, long before psychoanalysis gave it clinical language. Let us talk about Monica, Augustine's mother. In popular retellings, she is a saintly, weeping figure who prays her wayward son back to God. That is true, but it obscures something far more interesting and far more uncomfortable. Here is the take you will not hear in most churches. Monica is one of the most complex portraits of maternal obsession in all of literature. She follows Augustine across the Mediterranean. She drives away his long-term partner, the mother of his child, because the woman is not socially acceptable. She manipulates his marriage prospects. She inserts herself into his intellectual and spiritual life with a ferocity that Augustine clearly both loves and finds suffocating. Dostoevsky could have written her. She is not a simple symbol of faithful prayer. She is a fully realized human being, whose love for her son is inseparable from her need to control him. Augustine knows this. He writes about her with breathtaking honesty, mourning her death in Book 9, with a grief that reveals just how entangled their identities had become. When Monica dies, Augustine does not just lose his mother. He loses the person who had been the primary audience for his entire existence. Book 10 of the Confessions is where Augustine does something that most readers are completely unprepared for. He stops telling his life story and begins exploring the architecture of human memory. What follows is one of the most extraordinary passages in all of philosophy. Augustine describes memory as a vast palace with infinite rooms. He walks through it and finds not just past experiences, but emotions detached from their original contexts. Knowledge he does not remember learning, and desires he has supposedly conquered, but that still lives somewhere in the depths, waiting. Here is the insight that should make every modern reader sit up. Augustine is describing the unconscious mind. He is saying that there are contents of your own psyche that are genuinely yours, but that you cannot access through deliberate effort. They surface unbidden in dreams and sudden temptations, in moments of inexplicable recognition. You contain more than you know, and what you do not know about yourself can ambush you at any moment. This is not a metaphor. Augustine is making a serious philosophical claim. The self is not transparent to itself. You are not the master of your own inner house. Carl Jung would have recognized this passage immediately. Augustine got there first, by about 15 centuries. Now we arrive at what many philosophers consider the intellectual peak of the Confessions, the analysis of time in Book 11. And this is where Augustine goes from being a brilliant autobiographer to being one of the most important philosophers who ever lived. He begins with a question that sounds simple. What is time? He immediately shows that it is anything but simple. The past no longer exists. The future does not yet exist. The present is a knife edge with no duration. So where is time? What are we actually measuring when we say something lasted a long time? Here is Augustine's revolutionary answer. Time does not exist in the external world. It exists in the mind. What we call the past is memory. What we call the future is expectation. What we call the present is attention. Time is not a container we move through. It is a distension of the soul, a stretching of consciousness across what does not exist. This is not ancient mysticism. This is a philosophical argument that Einstein's physics would later echo. The idea that time is not an absolute external framework, but is bound up with the observer, anticipates relativity by 1500 years. Physicists may not cite Augustine, but they are working in the territory he mapped. The conversion scene in Book 8 is the most famous moment in the Confessions. Augustine hears a child's voice saying, "Take up and read," opens the Bible at random, reads a passage from Romans, and is transformed. It is one of the foundational scenes of Christian literature. But here is what almost everyone gets wrong. Augustine's conversion is not a moment of intellectual persuasion. By this point in the book, he has already been intellectually convinced of Christianity for years. He has read the Neoplatonists. He has listened to Ambrose. He knows in his mind that Christianity is true. And yet he cannot convert. The problem is not his intellect. It is his will. The conversion in the garden is not about thinking differently. It is about the will finally, inexplicably surrendering. Augustine cannot explain why it happens at that particular moment. He does not try. The child's voice, the random Bible passage. These are not arguments. They are the occasion for something that reason cannot produce. Augustine is telling us that the most important change a human being can undergo is not a change of mind, but a change of will, and that this kind of change cannot be manufactured. It arrives like grace, which is, of course, exactly his point. Let me leave you with the biggest claim of all, and it is one that scholars increasingly agree with. Before Augustine, no one in the Western tradition had written like this. No one had turned inward with this level of detail, this degree of psychological honesty, this willingness to treat the movements of one's own soul as worthy of rigorous analysis. The Confessions did not just describe the inner life, it invented the genre of doing so. Every memoir, every autobiography, every novel that takes interiority seriously, from Montaigne to Proust to your favorite confessional podcast, is downstream of this book. Augustine taught the West that the self was a legitimate subject of investigation. Before him, you studied the cosmos, or virtue, or God. After him, you could also study yourself, and that study could be a way of studying God. Here is the final provocation. We live in an age obsessed with self-knowledge, with therapy, with journaling, with understanding our own psychology. We assume this is modern. It is not. It is Augustinian. Every time you sit with a therapist and try to articulate why you did something you knew was wrong, you are performing an act that Augustine pioneered in the 4th century. The Confessions is not an old book. It is the book that made your inner life legible to you. Consider what Augustine did. He took the tools of Roman rhetoric, the traditions of Greek philosophy, the narratives of Hebrew scripture, and the raw material of his own messy, contradictory life, and he fused them into something that had never existed before. A sustained, unflinching investigation of what it is like to be a single human being. Not a type, not a category, a person. With specific memories, specific failures, specific moments of inexplicable grace. Before Augustine, the individual soul was not considered a worthy subject for serious literature. After him, it became the central subject of Western culture. And here is what makes it even more remarkable. He did this not as a secular project, but as a prayer. The entire Confessions is addressed to God. Every insight, every memory, every philosophical argument is spoken in the second person. You, Lord. Augustine is not performing for an audience. He is performing an act of radical transparency before the being he believes already knows everything about him. The question the book is really asking is not, who am I? It is, who am I when I stop pretending you are not watching? That question has not aged a single day. So there you have it. A teenage pear thief who discovered pure evil. A prayer so honest it scandalized the faithful. A mother whose love was indistinguishable from control. A memory palace that predicts the unconscious. A theory of time that anticipates Einstein. A conversion that proves reason alone cannot save you. And the invention of the examined inner life as we know it. The Confessions is not a devotional text gathering dust on a shelf. It is a live wire, and if you pick it up, do not be surprised if it reads you more thoroughly than you read it. Thank you for watching.